afternoon, everybody. So now we are going to listen to the last two representatives of the Office of the Prosecutor. I see Ms. Looping ready, so Ms. Looping, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Your Honours. Mr. President, Your Honours, Bosco Ntaganda acknowledged that in any army, and I quote, "Each person will take care of or will meet his obligations following the example set by the superior," end quote. And Bosco Ntaganda led by negative example. As multiple witnesses testified, Bosco Ntaganda was not nicknamed the Terminator for being a peacemaker, but for being a notorious, violent killer. Indeed, the accused set the UPC's criminal pattern of behaviour and commission of crimes. He directly and indirectly perpetrated crimes. He contributed to crimes committed by others. He gave criminal orders to his troops, or he induced them to commit crimes. And he failed to punish or take all necessary and reasonable measures to prevent crimes. Your Honours, it has been proven beyond reasonable doubt that Bosco Ntaganda is individually criminally responsible under Article 25 for all of the crimes as charged, and that he acted with the necessary intent and knowledge. I will address the different ways in which Mr. Ntaganda is criminally responsible under Article 25. First, as a direct perpetrator under Article 25(3)(a), and second, as he indirectly participated in the crimes committed or attempted as an indirect or direct co-perpetrator by ordering or inducing crimes of his troops, and by contributing to the crimes of his group, the UPC, who acted with a common purpose. Under Article 25(3)(a), B, D, and F. Finally, I will address how Mr. Ntaganda acted with the necessary intent and knowledge under Articles 25 and 30. Mr. Iverson will address the evidence showing Mr. Ntaganda's failure to punish or take all necessary and reasonable measures to prevent crimes. But starting first with the accused direct perpetration of crimes. Bosco Ntaganda directly perpetrated the crimes of attacks on civilians, murder, attacks on protected objects, pillaging, persecution, and he enlisted and used child soldiers. The evidence of these crimes is not only significant for his own criminal responsibility, but also for his responsibility for his subordinates' crimes. As a commander, he set the standard for his troops, and he influenced their behaviour through his commission of serious crimes. His behaviour signalled to his troops what was expected of them. Bosco Ntaganda directly perpetrated the crimes of attacks against, murder, and persecution of civilians. The accused's criminal orders to kill Lendu civilians is not only relevant to his responsibility under Article 25(3)(b), but it also shows how he personally persecuted and directed attacks against civilians. You heard testimony from UPC insiders P768, P963, P10, P888, and P190, who all consistently described Bosco Ntaganda's repeated orders that he regularly gave during military training and pre-attack briefings to eliminate or drive out the Lendu without distinction between combatants and civilians. The accused constantly identified as the enemy the Lendu and the predominantly Nande APC group. The accused order to kill Lendu without distinction was effectively a standing order. First, the accused gave these criminal orders to direct attacks against and persecute civilians during the military training. Insiders P10, P16, P888, P758 and P190 heard Bosco Ntaganda and other instructors teach recruits, including child soldiers, that the Lendu were the enemy, not distinguishing between combatants or civilians. Military insiders P963 and P16 also confirmed that Bosco Ntaganda failed to train his troops to obey humanitarian or criminal law or to be disciplined with civilians. Turning to the first attack, military insiders P768, P963 and P10, who all themselves participated in the first attack, heard the accused give these orders to target Lendu before the attack. Bosco Ntaganda matched his words with action by fully participating in the crimes in or around Mongwalu and Sayo. Military insiders P17, P963 and P768 saw the accused personally direct the attack on Sayo village. The accused's troops implemented his criminal orders, firing systematically and indiscriminately, with civilians killed as a result.
Ms. Looping, sorry to interrupt you. Could you kindly, in order to have precise transcript, could you kindly slow down? Because I see some problems on the side of transcribers.
Certainly, Mr. President, and my apologies to the interpreters. P17 testified that Bosco Ntaganda ordered him to fire at fleeing civilians. Near Sayo Church, P894 saw the accused attack and kill 4 non-Hema civilians, including 2 children. He also saw the accused shoot dead the retired Colonel Lusala after interrogating him and accusing him of supporting Lendu. The evidence shows that Bosco Ntaganda also directed attacks against civilians in or around Mongwalu. Insiders P963, P907, P888, and crime-based witness P894 described how the accused gave his troops orders to hunt for Lendu, which were implemented in the usual mop-up operations after the military operation. Those deemed unimportant were killed straight away. But those who might have valuable information were first interrogated before they were killed. Indeed, as an example, you heard senior military insider testify that Bosco Ntaganda attacked and murdered the Abe Bonalonga, a Lendu Ngiti priest. The accused interrogated and he beat the priest before executing him in cold blood at close range. Insiders P768, P963, and P17 also heard the accused give orders to his troops to shoot or execute captured persons, and they saw or learned of detainees executed at the accused's residence. A senior military commander heard Bosco Ntaganda order his bodyguards to kill 3 Lendu nuns who were first raped by his guards. That same senior military commander saw Bosco Ntaganda order his escorts to execute 2 Lendu civilians found in nearby Nzebi, who were then murdered. The accused gave specific orders at other times to direct an attack against and persecute Lendu. Another senior military insider heard the accused order his bodyguards to kill Lendu civilian women whom the UPDF had brought into their camps, the accused stating, "They are all considered to be our enemy." During the first attack, the accused also systematically pillaged, personally and through his subordinates. The defense claims that the UPC did not steal any items for personal use. But Bosco Ntaganda stole goods that were clearly for his own personal use, including gold, televisions, radios, freezers, clothes, beer, and vehicles. Senior military insiders, including P16, P901, and insider P963, saw the accused's stolen goods that were taken back to his Bunia personal residence. You have also heard how Bosco Ntaganda attacked protected objects by pillaging from Mongwalu Hospital and churches. You've also heard how Bosco Ntaganda personally enlisted children below 15. UPC insiders, including P963, P768, P901, P10, P769, P41, and P190 all heard Mr. Ntaganda giving speeches encouraging the Hema community to give up children as soldiers to the UPC or for young people to join them. You heard numerous witnesses testify that Bosco Ntaganda used children under 15 as soldiers, some as his own escorts. He used children to actively participate in hostilities, and some of whom were killed. I will now address Bosco Ntaganda's responsibility as a co-perpetrator. And Your Honours, in the screen before you now, I have the key elements of co-perpetration as a reminder of what needs to be proven, both for direct and indirect co-perpetration. First, the 2 objective elements common to both indirect and direct co-perpetration. A common plan or agreement between 2 or more persons, including the accused. The accused's essential contributions to that common plan. And then the 2 additional objective elements to be proven for indirect co-perpetration. His use of another person or of an organized and hierarchical organization, and that organization being composed of replaceable individuals. And the final element being the co-perpetrator's joint control over the organization to secure joint control over the crimes. Starting with the first element, and that's the common plan. The prosecution recalls, as confirmed in the Lubanga trial judgment, that it does not need to prove that the plan itself was specifically directed at committing a crime. Only that the plan included a critical element of criminality, so that its implementation will in the ordinary course of events lead to the commission of a crime. The existence of the plan can be inferred from circumstantial evidence, such as the subsequent actions of the co-perpetrators. It doesn't need to be explicit or written. And turning now to the evidence of the common plan in this case. As you have heard, Bosco Ntaganda, as a co-perpetrator, committed crimes with others who agreed on a common plan to take over Itore's military and political control by force and to occupy the non-Hema dominated areas and drive out the non-Hema civilians, especially the Lendu and the Nande. And they used criminal means to implement that plan, namely all of the crimes as charged. Bosco Ntaganda and his co-perpetrators needed to use force to implement this plan to control the Itore, which is why they had to recruit children and others to build up their army. It has been proven beyond reasonable doubt that Bosco Ntaganda, Lubanga, Kasembo, with others, were co-perpetrators to the common plan, which lasted from at least the 6th of August 2002 until 31 December 2003. And Your Honours, what is the evidence of the common plan in this case? The existence of the plan is shown by the ethnic and the political context of the conflict in which the UPC was created, by the statements and the conduct of the co-perpetrators and the UPC, including in contemporaneous UPC documents, and by the way in which all of the UPC attacks were carried out, including the first and the second attacks. You'll recall that the accused conceded key elements of the common plan as he admitted that the UPC's ideology was to kick out once and for all the evil, and that their goal was to have power in Congo. UPC documents confirm that this evil to be ousted from Itore was defined as including the Lendu and their allies, especially the predominantly Nande APC forces. UPC documents also confirm the common plan of territorial control to take over to Itore and to use the FPLC as a national army. For instance, the UPC's founding document, the UPC statutes from 2000, refers to the plan to form a national army. Another UPC document, the 11 August 2002 declaration signed by Thomas Lubanga in the name of the UPC's precursor, the FRP, acknowledges the content of the common plan as it speaks of them taking charge of Itore following the ousting by force of the RCD-KML and its allies. On 22 October 2002, the UPC adopted the actions of the FRP of 9 August 2002 as being their own in a document, and I refer to DRC OTP 00370271. This irrefutably undermines Bosco Ntaganda's testimony that the FRP was not the same as the UPC, and his claim that the UPC did not take over Bunia, as this document shows that it was indeed the very same forces that took over Bunia. Bosco Ntaganda also conceded that he and his forces knew and they adopted the UPC's political ideology. Now, moving to the second element of co-perpetration that the prosecution must prove. The prosecution must prove that the accused made individual, essential contributions to the common plan or agreement. Under Article 25(3)(a), it is not necessary to prove that the accused made an intentional contribution to each individual crime or criminal incident that was committed on the basis of the common plan. Simply by the accused making an intentional, essential contribution to the common plan, the accused co-perpetrator is then liable for all of the crimes that occur within the framework of that common plan. And Your Honours, I refer in particular to the recent appeals judgment of the Bemba Article 70 case, paragraphs 812, 821, 1029 and 1307. So what does an essential contribution mean? The prosecution recalls that as the majority found in the Lubanga trial judgment for co-perpetration under Article 25.3a, quote, none of the participants exercises individually control over the crime as a whole, but instead the control over the crime falls in the hands of a collective as such, end quote. As a result, the term essential contribution does not mean that the individual accused's contribution, taken alone, caused the crime. What it requires is an assessment of whether the accused's contribution within the framework of the common plan was such that without it, and I quote, the crime would not have been committed, or it would have been committed in a significantly different way, end of quote. And I again refer to the Bemba Article 70 appeals judgment. So when assessing whether a contribution is essential or not, the Chamber must look at all the relevant contributions as a whole, and it mustn't artificially dissect or assess the isolated individual acts. The contribution can take many forms, and it doesn't need to be criminal in nature. The contribution can be the planning and the preparation stage. It doesn't need to be at the execution stage of the crime. In fact, it can even be at the time when the common plan itself is conceived. Now, turning to the evidence of the essential contributions in this case, numerous witnesses confirmed that between April and August 2002, Bosco Ntaganda and his co-perpetrators made different, coordinated contributions to implementing the common plan. What were Bosco Ntaganda's essential contributions to the plan? As the most senior military leader in charge of operations and organization, and as a hands-on leader, Bosco Ntaganda was a strong, controlling hand behind the common plan. His essential contributions to the common plan took many forms. I will address in detail 5 of these key contributions. And those 5 essential contributions being his key role in military operations, his role in directing and facilitating UPC crimes, his role in establishing training camps, recruiting, training, and using children and other soldiers to build their army, his role in organizing logistics, including weapons and ammunition, and finally, his coordination role in ensuring liaison with UPC leaders and subordinates alike. Even from 2000, when the UPC was first created and the common plan first conceived, Bosco Ntaganda made essential contributions as the key military leader of the FPLC's precursor, the Chui Mobile Force. For instance, he helped to establish its structure, assisted in recruitment, military training, and he planned and coordinated their military operations. Looking at the period 2002 to 2003, and turning to the accused's first essential contribution, the accused directly planned, commanded, directed, controlled, coordinated, and facilitated UPC attacks, and he personally participated in them. The accused, together with his co-perpetrators, led operations to ensure that the UPC gained control over Ituri and that they maintained that control. Indeed, the accused concedes that he was the UPC's Deputy Chief of Staff in charge of operations and organization, and that he was viewed as being very successful in his operations. You heard witnesses testify that the accused organized some of the operations entirely on his own initiative, and conversely, that no operations could occur without his involvement. This was confirmed, for example, by UPC insiders P901, 55, 16, 907, and 190, and witnesses P14 and 315. So turning to the accused's role in the first attack. Before the first attack, senior military insiders 768 and 55, and UPC insiders P907 and 190 testified that Bosco Ntaganda participated in planning meetings to organize the attack. You also heard insiders 768, 55, 901, and 17 testify that the accused arranged transport of weapons and personally distributed them. P768, P963, and P55 confirmed that the accused liaised with his subordinates and briefed them on the battle plan. I've already described how the accused directly participated in that fighting during the first attack. He directly commanded the UPC soldiers participating. P768 and P17 testified about the operational instructions he gave to UPC soldiers. 768, 10, 17, and 963 also confirmed that the accused liaised with his subordinates and others during the attack, and he received reports. Turning to the accused's contributions during the second attack. Your Honours, Bosco Ntaganda would have you believe that he had no role to play in the second attack. He knew nothing about it as it was unfolding, and he learnt only of crimes perpetrated during it in 2004. However, Your Honours, his implausible claims fly in the face of the consistent evidence that instead he played a leading role in the second attack. He planned, he coordinated it. Your Honours, just as an example, a reminder of the critical logbook message of the 19th of February 2003, now in front of you in the screens. And in this message, Bosco Ntaganda informs Kasembo and Lubanga that the troops had arrived in each zone in Lipri, Kobu, and Bamboo, and that they would be kept informed of what happened. So contrary to the accused's claims, it was him, not Kasembo, who was in a position to report on its progress and who had effective command and control over this operation. He clearly did know all about the second attack. His implausible and self-serving claims that he did not send the message should be rejected in light of the unambiguous text of the message itself and the clear confirmation from a reliable military insider that it was Bosco Ntaganda who sent it. The defense never challenged his testimony on this point. This message also appears in a logical sequential order. And the accused never claimed that the immediately preceding or subsequent messages were not sent by him. His claims are also contradicted by what his subordinates said. You heard UPC insiders, P55, P17, and P190 confirm that it was Bosco Ntaganda who commanded the second attack, and he reported to Kasembo and Lubanga. Senior military insider P55 credibly described how Bosco Ntaganda participated in pre-planning meetings, giving a sober description of the accused's role at that phase without embellishment. The defense alleges that P55 lied, but cannot explain why P55 would not try to inflate the accused's role even further, if these truly were lies meant to incriminate the accused. You also heard P55 confirm that before the second attack, Bosco Ntaganda provided weapons and ammunition, and he decided on deployments. Logbook messages of 17 to 18 February 2003 show the accused giving orders for deployments before the second attack. And we should recall two key logbook messages of 18 February 2003, now before you on your screens, that show the reality that it was the accused who had overall control over the troops for this attack. In the first message, on 18 February 2003, Brigade Commander Mulenda, who led the second attack in the field, reports to Sector Commander Salongo, copying the accused, not Kasembo, about his battalion commander's refusal to advance to Lipri. And in the second message, also from the same day, it's the accused, and not Kasembo, who responds, saying the battalion commander could not refuse to advance to Lipri. P768 and P46 confirmed that UPC soldiers amongst Mulenda's troops at Kobu considered that it was the accused who had command authority over them for this battle. Indeed, P17, P963, P901 and P290 testified that the accused issued operational orders to FPLC soldiers for this attack. As for the accused's claim that he knew nothing about the conduct of the second attack or any of the crimes committed during it, P55, P901 and P907 confirmed that to the contrary, he maintained regular contact with UPC soldiers in the field throughout the second attack, including by radio, by manpack, and by thuraya. They confirmed that he was receiving updates and reports on the situation from the field, including daily reports from Sector Commander Salongo. So in truth, he knew what was happening at all times. His claim that he knew nothing about the second attack is also highly implausible for a commander whose knowledge of everything that happened was so extreme, whose controls of the military so all-pervasive, that it even extended, for example, to the precise amount of bullets being used by his soldiers and the comings and goings of simple soldiers. His claim that there were no communications with him during the second attack must fail. He admitted that throughout the period of the charges, there was no problem or obstacle to him exercising his role. He conceded that in that time, he had various means of communicating with the UPC, as far away as Aru and Mahagi, including by Motorola, thuraya, written communications, in person, in addition to the manpack. He concedes that before the Mongwalu operation, he could communicate with Kasembo, not only by Manpack, but also by Thuraya. Even if the chamber believes his unbelievable claims that he was in Rwanda during the second attack, he admitted he had his Thuraya with him, that you could communicate between continents by Thuraya, and indeed that Thomas Lubanga in Bunia was able to communicate with him by Thuraya. Moving back to his essential contributions, to the second contribution. The accused directed, controlled, and facilitated the commission of UPC crimes by UPC soldiers and HEMA civilian supporters, and he personally engaged in the commission of crimes. You've already heard how during the first attack, he personally murdered Lendu and other civilians. The accused, during the first attack, also brought women back to his residence who were visibly intimidated. You heard how he also used, raped, and sexually enslaved UPC soldiers, which sent the signal that it was legitimate to use, rape, and sexually enslave them. I described a multitude of instructions or orders that triggered the commission of crimes, including his standing order to kill and drive out Lendu. Bosco Ntaganda gave another standard order to soldiers to, and I quote, do their work, end of quote, which his troops understood to mean to kill them or do everything that you want to do, including to rape and then kill. You've also heard how Bosco Ntaganda gave the criminal order to Kupija Nakuchaji before the first attack, which was understood by UPC soldiers to mean they should attack anybody they found and they could take whatever they wanted. It was implemented by attacks on civilians that included rape and killing and women being treated like war booty. His criminal orders to kill and drive out Lendu and to Kupija Nakuchaji were repeated by his subordinate, Mulenda, for the second attack. He also showed that the crimes were condoned and encouraged, as he took no action to punish any UPC perpetrators for crimes that were committed against Lendu or non-originaire. The accused's third essential contribution to the plan was in helping to establish training camps by his recruitment, training, and use of children and other soldiers in the UPC. The accused concedes that he was involved in the training of FPLC recruits, and numerous witnesses, including 768, 17, 55, 883, and P14, confirm that the accused trained recruits and was responsible for the UPC's training and training camps. He also helped conscript child soldiers, and you heard how he abducted boys and girls from Mutsipela in 2002, including those aged 10 to 13. He decided on the troops' deployment, including children under 15. You heard P901 and P290 testify that Bosco Ntaganda gave orders for children below 15 to be deployed after their training. And you've also heard how he personally used child soldiers. Bosco Ntaganda also made an essential contribution by organizing logistics. The accused concedes that he had a role in distributing weapons. And you heard witnesses testify that he obtained and he distributed weapons and ammunition for UPC attacks and UPC crimes. You heard, for instance, from the military insiders 55, 768, 16, 901, 17, and 190. And moving to the fifth and final essential contribution that I am focusing on, he coordinated and liaised between the co-perpetrators and with others. They regularly discussed the common plan. They briefed and they instructed the troops on operational matters. And this, Your Honours, is demonstrated by the frequent meetings and contacts with his co-perpetrators, including Lubanga and Kasembo, and his tight controls over strategic and day-to-day issues with UPC subordinates. Now, returning, Your Honours, to the final two elements to be proven for indirect co-perpetration. The first is that the prosecution must prove that the accused committed crimes through another person or an organised hierarchical apparatus of power. And the prosecution must establish that there was a way of ensuring compliance, which can be proven, for instance, by showing that the organisation had a large enough number of subordinates, so if there was any subordinate who refused to comply, they could be easily replaced by somebody else who would. Or it can be proven by showing there was an intensive, strict, and violent training regime. Moving to the evidence in this case, Bosco Ntaganda used UPC soldiers and semi-civilians within the organised hierarchical UPC structure to commit crimes. The accused acknowledged that the UPC was an organised and hierarchical structure of power, and that no subordinate officer in the FPLC could refuse to carry out an order of his hierarchical superior. The evidence also showed that there were large numbers within the UPC, so that if a fighter refused an order, he or she could be readily replaced. Finally, the prosecution needs to prove that Bosco Ntaganda, with his other co-perpetrators, had joint control over the crimes by controlling the organisation which they could steer towards implementing the common plan. The prosecution does not need to prove that each co-perpetrator, including the accused, was individually in a position to control the organisation, but that the control was exercised by the co-perpetrators jointly. On the facts of this case, Your Honours, this means that it is not necessary to prove that Bosco Ntaganda was the most senior military leader, or more senior, or more powerful than Floribert Kasembo. It's enough to show that he and his co-perpetrators shared joint control over the organisation and could get their subordinates to commit crimes by following their orders. And this has been proven, Your Honours. There were enough soldiers in the UPC to follow the orders, and there was a strict training to ensure they complied. The accused concedes that Kasembo and Lubanga had controls over the UPC. He denies he had any shared control. However, the evidence proves that the accused was a senior UPC commander with tight control and influence over the troops. He concedes he was a high-level UPC commander and the UPC's Deputy Chief of Staff in charge of operations and organisation. He concedes he had considerable influence over the FPLC and commanded a very disciplined army. He admits he could punish his subordinates. Indeed, witnesses and the logbook confirm that Bosco Ntaganda and his co-perpetrators harshly disciplined his troops, just not for crimes against Lendu, and that he insisted on obedience consistent with his position within the hierarchy, and that he demanded compliance with his orders. In fact, even though the prosecution does not need to prove this, the evidence shows that his powers went much further than that. Multiple witnesses testified that from the UPC's inception, the accused wielded far greater power than his formal role suggests. He was effectively the real army chief of the FPLC and Lubanga's number 2. His authority on military and operational matters was left unchallenged. It was no slip of the tongue when in a video dated November 2002, he describes himself as the FPLC's Chief of Staff. Nor was it a mistake when UPC's president, Lubanga, also describes him in a video dated February 2003 as Le Chef d'État-Major, Commandant Bosco. The accused's elevated role within the UPC was logical. Bearing in mind, he had greater military leadership experience and skills. He was the founder and leader of the UPC's precursor, the Chui Mobile Force, in which Kasembo was his deputy. Nothing changed in 2002 and 2003. He remained the UPC's top military leader, tactician, instructor, and motivator. Kasembo was de facto chosen as Chief of Staff because he was a Hema, but Lubanga had more confidence in Bosco and Ntaganda. Senior Military Commander 768 confirmed that Bosco and Ntaganda was responsible for everything, from the UPC's training and deployments to weapons and operations, and that he was more present and influential than his own hierarchical superior. Similarly, P907 testified that the accused planned the war, was in charge of all the war operations. You couldn't go to war without his approval. He was the boss. He was the one who received all the reports. He was the person who was responsible. Nobody else. The accused had other powers over the organization to appoint, replace, remove, and promote UPC officers and soldiers. And Mr. Iverson will detail further the accused's powers of effective command and control. As for the accused's criminal responsibility under the other modes of liability under Article 25, the prosecution relies on its submissions in its closing brief as to how it has been proven beyond reasonable doubt that the accused is also responsible under Articles 25, 3b, D, and F. Your Honours, I'll now address the accused's intent and knowledge. And in this section, I'll first address the evidence that proves the accused's intent and knowledge, and then I will be addressing two legal issues that the defence raised in their defence reply brief. It has been proven beyond reasonable doubt that the accused committed or attempted crimes or made contributions to the common plan or common purpose, or ordered or induced the crimes with the requisite intent and knowledge. The accused knew that the common plan and common purpose involved an element of criminality, and that he and his co-perpetrators could jointly exercise functional control over the crimes. He knew of the key features of the UPC organization. He knew of the coordinated contributions of his co-perpetrators and the joint control that they exercised. And because of his knowledge of the criminal methods that he previously used, he must have intended the commission of each of the crimes resulting from the common plan or common purpose. Or at the very least, he knew that the crimes will occur in the ordinary course of implementing the common plan. He made intentional contributions, either with the aim of furthering the criminal purpose of the group, or he knew that the group intended to commit crimes. This is shown, for instance, by his position and authority within the UPC, his command of the troops, his role in the planning and his participation in attacks, and his communication with subordinates and other members of the group. when he ordered and he induced his troops, he was at the very least aware that the crime will be committed in the ordinary course of events as a consequence of realization of the execution or implementation of his order. In fact, Your Honours, the evidence shows that Bosco Ntaganda clearly intended for all the crimes to occur. His participation was not inadvertent or uninformed. His words, his deeds, his knowledge of the FPLC's methods, including his own perpetration of crimes, and his criminal orders to kill and oust Lendu and Kupicha Nakuchaji, all demonstrate his intent to commit crimes and his knowledge of crimes. His failure to punish his troops also proves his intent. You've heard how after the second attack, the accused not only failed to punish Mulenda for the crimes committed in Kobu, but called him a real man for his killings of civilians there. This callous attitude was consistent with his standing order, but also with his intent to kill Lendu. Now, what of the accused's specific intent to persecute Lendu? Bosco Ntaganda would have you believe that he did not have the specific intent to persecute Lendu. He has given examples of where he cooperated with them. But, Your Honours, those few times Bosco Ntaganda may have tried to cooperate with Lendu was always for self-serving reasons. For instance, to get Lendu to return to Mongwalu to work the gold mines for them. The defence has also tried to rely on UPC videos and statements to suggest that the UPC didn't intend to target the Lendu. But the UPC and the accused routinely use propaganda to hide the reality that the Lendu and the Nande were viewed as their enemy and were targeted, and that the UPC was a predominantly Hema organisation representing Hema as well as Tutsi interests. And I refer to the detailed arguments in the prosecution's closing brief at paragraphs 895 to 929. Bosco Ntaganda would also have you believe that he saw it as his job to protect civilians, Lendu included. Your Honours, I would just recall one more example of the accused's real attitude towards Lendu civilians. And it was that moment when he came across civilians sheltering in the Sayo church. As P17 vividly described, the accused swore at them in Kenya, Rwanda to, and I quote, "Go fuck your mother," end of quote, before his bodyguard shot one of them and the rest were executed with bladed weapons. This is not the behavior of a military commander intent on caring for and protecting all civilians, Lendu included. The defence has tried to argue that Chef Kawa's alleged protection of some Lendu civilians who are amongst largely Hema displaced persons sheltering in Mandro proves that the UPC did not target or discriminate against Lendu. The prosecution does not need to prove that the co-perpetrators shared the accused's persecutory intent. And Chef Kawa was expelled by the UPC, including for alleged treasonous behaviour towards the UPC movement. And D54's evidence did not show that it was the accused who gave shelter to Lendu civilians at Mandro. And what of the accused's intent and knowledge regarding child soldiers? He knew and he intended that children under 15 were recruited and used by the UPC as soldiers. Even when he was leading the Chui Mobile Forces in 2000, He knew that children under 15 were amongst his forces. His continuing knowledge and intent that children under 15 be recruited and used as soldiers in 2002 as well as 2003 is amply shown by his own conduct. Not only was it his job to know what was going on with regard to UPC training and recruitment, but he actively kept himself directly involved. He abducted recruits. He was responsible for all training. He regularly visited their camps, and he even purchased their small-sized boots. He personally used children as his escorts, and he sent them into battle. He deployed the child recruits. He was present where other commanders were using them, and he met with groups calling for their demobilization. The accused also admitted to UN officials and to a researcher, P315, that he knew that there were children amongst the UPC. Bosco Ntaganda also knew and intended that UPC soldiers be raped and sexually enslaved. It was common knowledge that senior UPC commanders raped UPC soldiers, including their female escorts, and the accused raped them himself. Your Honours, as I have stated, at the very least, Bosco Ntaganda knew that the crimes will occur in the ordinary course of implementing the common plan. The first and the second attacks were not his first UPC attacks. He knew the means and methods to be used from his prior, recent command experience in the attacks in Bunia, Songolo, Zumbe, and Mambasa, Komanda, and Ngeti. He planned and he took a leading role in all of these prior UPC attacks. In these attacks, the same crimes were consistently perpetrated: murder and attempted murder, rape, sexual slavery, attacks on civilians and on protected objects, pillaging and property destruction, persecution, and forced displacement and transfer. And in these attacks, even after the fighting was over, the UPC would routinely hunt for non-Hema civilians in mop-up operations, when they would rape, kill, steal, and destroy their property. Individuals in these attacks were the victims of multiple UPC crimes, not just one. Bosco Ntaganda also knew that rape of civilians was an ordinary part of warfare amongst UPC soldiers. None of these crimes were random. None of them were isolated acts. The crimes were a strategic and consistent means of achieving the common plan or purpose. The accused also knew what was happening because he was an active commander. He conceded he was an active commander who kept himself apprised of the situation while the UPC conducted operations. He testified, quote, "The troops realized that I was aware of what was happening, that I was monitoring them, and that showed the commanders that I was up to speed with all the offences being committed in our forces, that I was really aware of everything that was going on at all times," end quote. He was either on the ground with the fighting forces, or he was controlling operations from a distance, and he knew what was happening during the operations. He had to maintain operational awareness for him to be able to effectively command his troops, maintain control over them, and ensure compliance with his orders and proper troop functioning. He had an effective and well-established communications and reporting system. He made regular trips to see his soldiers in the field. He also admitted that he did receive reports from G2 intelligence staff. His personal conduct and intent must be interpreted in the context of his abundant knowledge of the activities of the UPC and its soldiers. Your Honours, I now turn to focus on two legal issues as raised by the defence in their defence reply brief. Both relate to the correct interpretation of the test for mens rea under Articles 25 and 30. Starting first with Article 30. The prosecution is mindful that the Lubanga appeal judgment interpreted Article 30, subparagraph 2b, and 30, subparagraph 3, requiring that the accused is aware that a consequence will occur in the ordinary course of events to mean that the accused was aware of a virtual certainty. However, the prosecution respectfully urges the trial chamber, when interpreting intent and knowledge under Article 30, to adopt a common sense and plain language interpretation of the text, whether or not a prohibited consequence will occur in the ordinary course of events. Although the Lubanga Appeals Chamber held that for both Article 30, subparagraph 2b, and 30, subparagraph 3 alike, that the standard for foreseeability of events is virtual certainty, it recognised that, and I quote, absolute certainty about a future occurrence can never exist, end quote. In Bemba, the prosecution noted its concern that the Lubanga Appeals Chamber's interpretation of Article 30, from which it derived the virtual certainty standard, appeared to give insufficient consideration to what ordinary course of events really means in practical terms. But this question was not addressed in the Bemba Appeals judgment. This chamber should ensure that any interpretation of Article 30 is in keeping with the statute, including the aim to end impunity, and accordingly reject the defence's arguments that it must apply an artificially high threshold test. Notwithstanding the virtual certainty language, the broader context of the Lubanga judgment evinces no intention to repudiate the statutory requirement that liability attaches when the accused is aware that the consequence will occur in the ordinary course of events, and nor could it do so. And it is for this trial chamber now to apply this test meaningfully in practice. Now, to be clear, the prosecution is not suggesting that the trial chamber apply a dolus eventualis standard. Indeed, the prosecution reiterates its position that the drafters deliberately excluded reference to the standard and to concepts such as dolus directus because they're abstract concepts that can have different meanings in different national systems. And in this respect, the defence is incorrect in the defence reply brief to imply that the ad hoc tribunals only allowed a mens rea less than dolus directus for joint criminal enterprise 3. To the contrary, the liability at these tribunals for planning, instigating, and ordering in customary international law was also established on the basis of the mens rea that the accused acts with, and I quote, awareness of the substantial likelihood that a crime will be committed, end quote. The prosecution refers, for example, to Prosecutor Encaradich at paragraphs 571 to 573 in its trial judgment, and would also refer to the other ICTY and ICTR authorities cited in that judgment. At this court, these modes of liability have consistently been recognised as analogous to those in Article 25(3)b of the statute. And I refer, for example, to the Murachimura arrest warrant decision at paragraph 63, in which the chamber said, and I quote, taking note of the way ordering liability is analysed at the ad hoc tribunals, end of quote, and citing ad hoc jurisprudence in construing Article 25(3)b, which was then followed in subsequent cases. The prosecution submits that the approach that this trial chamber takes to the interpretation of will occur in the ordinary course of events should apply to all modes of liability under Article 25, which rely for their mens rea standard on the test in Article 30, subparagraph 2b, and 30, subparagraph 3. That is, that this chamber should adopt a common sense, plain language interpretation of the test, whether a prohibited consequence will occur in the ordinary course of events. In this case, the evidence meets the mens rea standard in Article 30, subparagraph 2b, and 30, subparagraph 3, beyond reasonable doubt. Secondly, the defence in its reply brief has raised an issue as to the scope of mens rea for Article 25 and whether it's necessary or not to establish actual knowledge of crimes. Your Honours, it's simply an effect of Article 30, subparagraph 2b, that there is no need to prove the accused's actual knowledge of crimes if it's established that he was aware that he contributed to the plan in which crime will occur in the ordinary course of events. The prosecution agrees that the mens rea of the accused relates to both the fact of his contribution to the common plan and the nature of the plan as leading to crimes in the ordinary course of events. In conclusion, Your Honours, the prosecution asks that the chamber make a finding in relation to each of the modes of liability of the accused under Article 25(3)a, b, d, and f, and Article 28, all of which have been proven beyond reasonable doubt. This concludes my submissions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Looping. Now it's turn for Mr. Iverson.
Mr. President, if I may, while Mr. Iverson is getting ready, I note 2 transcript corrections in Ms. Looping's submissions.
Please go ahead.
Page 125, line 5. The reference should be to paragraphs 571 to 573. And on page 119, line 13, the reference should be now what of the accused's specific intent. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Iverson, according to my counting, the OTP, not only, but the OTP is expected to complete its closing statement. I'm not saying strictly, but around quarter past 4. Is my expectation realistic?
That is definitely realistic, Mr. President. I plan on finishing before that time, yes. Probably just a few minutes after 4 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Iverson. Please go ahead.
It is my privilege to address your honors on the last topic of the day. And that topic is the responsibility of commanders under Article 28 of the Rome Statute. Command responsibility is a mode of criminal liability essential to the efficacy and functioning of international humanitarian law, IHL, which regulates the conduct of hostilities during times of armed conflict. Military commanders have immense destructive forces under their control, and they hold the power to ensure that their forces understand their legal obligations and observe them during the conduct of hostilities. If commanders do not ensure that their forces obey the law, if they do not carefully supervise their subordinates, IHL cannot be effective. The role of a commander in maintaining discipline, disseminating the law and punishing those responsible for violations of the law is of paramount importance to respect for IHL, the protection of the civilian population, and to prevent the serious crimes that fall under this court's jurisdiction. The failure of a military commander to meet his or her duty to prevent subordinates from committing crimes or punishing those responsible for crimes requires that the failing commander be held accountable. And in this case, we say that is Mr. Ntaganda. Article 28A has 4 legal elements. The chamber must be convinced beyond reasonable doubt that 1, Mr. Ntaganda was a military commander. 2, that the forces that committed the charged crimes were under Mr. Ntaganda's effective command and control. 3, that Mr. Ntaganda either knew or, owing to circumstances at the time, should have known that his forces were committing or about to commit such crimes. And 4, that Mr. Ntaganda failed to take all necessary and reasonable measures within his power to prevent or repress the commission of crimes or to submit the matter to the competent authorities for investigation and prosecution. I will discuss first the issue of effective control, and then Mr. Ntaganda's knowledge, measures, and I'll end talking briefly about causation within Article 28. The element of effective control is effective command and control is commonly referred to as effective control, and I will refer to it as such. Effective control is understood as a commander's material ability to prevent subordinates from committing crimes, repress the commission of crimes, or submit the matter of crimes to the competent authorities for investigation and prosecution. The exercise of effective control depends on the existence of a superior-subordinate relationship between the commander and the perpetrator of crimes. In order to determine whether the legal element of effective control has been proven, courts have looked to a number of relevant factors or indicia of the commander's material ability to prevent or punish the crimes. These factors include, among others, the power to issue orders, the ability to ensure that orders are carried out, the position of the commander within the structure of the group, and his or her tasks, the ability to order those under his or her command to engage in hostilities and to withdraw them from where hostilities are taking place.
Mr. Iverson, sorry, please slow down slightly because there are many complex terms, and in order to keep our transcript precise, we are not under time pressure, so no problem if you will need to have some more time, so please slow down a bit.
Duly noted. I'll slow it down, Mr. President. Also, the power to promote, replace, or remove subordinates, and the capacity to discipline subordinates, including initiating punishment or investigations and making reports to competent authorities. The accused had all of these powers. In particular, Mr. Ntaganda acknowledged that he retained the material ability to prevent and punish crimes in his testimony by confirming that he could detain sector commanders, quote, without hesitation, unquote. And going on to state that, quote, all my subordinates, I could punish them, unquote. In recognizing his powers, he highlighted his control over his subordinates and showed that he understood his place in the UPC-FPLC hierarchy. The defense invites you to believe that Mr. Ntaganda's role was one of a staff officer and that he was not a commander at all, though its only source for this claim is Mr. Ntaganda himself. The defense primarily rely on Mr. Ntaganda's official title, Deputy Chief of Staff in charge of operations and organization, to argue this point. However, job titles are not the decisive factor in establishing control. What is important is the evidence of Mr. Ntaganda's actual powers, his function, and his capacity to control his subordinates' actions through his orders and through his disciplinary ability. Prosecution witnesses independently confirm that Mr. Ntaganda had the powers to control his subordinates' actions. For instance, prosecution witness 901 stated, quote, "Within the FPLC, no one was respected more than Afande Bosco. He was the most respected person, and the orders that he gave were followed and enforced by everyone," unquote. The defense also argued that Mr. Ntaganda only acted as a commander for short periods of time when command was formally passed to him. Now, first of all, Mr. Ntaganda's claim of handing over responsibility is unsupported, implausible, and impractical in a military sense. Secondly, and more importantly, the issue to be resolved by the chamber is not whether the superior was formally placed in command at any given moment, but rather whether he had the material ability to prevent and punish the perpetrators of crimes. The defense...
Sorry to interrupt you, I would like to transcript page 131, third line, the missing word is responsibility. Am I correct like this? Handing over responsibility is unsupported. Please proceed.
I believe that's correct, Mr. President. Thank you. Yes, it is. The defense also claims that two commanders cannot be in command at the same time, concluding, therefore, that Mr. Ntaganda and Kisembo could not hold command simultaneously. On the face of things, this may make a certain kind of sense, but this was not the practice in the UPC, FPLC, or for that matter, any functioning military organization. It is routine that commanders on various levels simultaneously exercise effective command and control over the same subordinates. So, for instance, a platoon or section will be led by a platoon or section leader, and a company by a company commander who will also have authority over the platoons. And a battalion will be led by a battalion commander having authority over battalion, company, and platoon. And this applies equally to all levels of command up to the highest headquarters of any military organization. All these commanders are legally responsible for their respective units. Mr. Ntaganda was in charge of all UPC, FPLC military operations. So when I say highest headquarters, that's what I mean. And the evidence is clear on this point. Prosecution witness 963 stated that Ntaganda was, quote, "the one who commanded the operations," unquote. Witness 190 said, quote, "not a single operation could have been undertaken without Ntaganda's involvement in his capacity as person in charge of operations," unquote. And 55 stated that Ntaganda was in charge of operations. And yet again, prosecution witness 14 said, quote, "in operational terms, the Army was basically run by Bosco Ntaganda," unquote. I'll now turn to Mr. Ntaganda's knowledge of the charged crimes. The evidence in the record of the case establishes that Bosco Ntaganda knew, or owing to the circumstances at the time, should have known that his subordinates were committing or were going to commit one of the several of the charged crimes. As explained by Ms. Looping, some of the most compelling evidence of Mr. Ntaganda's knowledge of the charged crimes comes from his own personal and direct participation and perpetration of some of the charged crimes. And similarly, from his presence during his troops' commission of crimes and in the training camps, where he could see and interact with child soldiers. The defense claims that Mr. Ntaganda had only limited knowledge of some of the offenses committed by his troops, but that he had no knowledge of the very crimes that we have charged in this case. Mr. Ntaganda's professed ignorance stands in stark contrast to prosecution witnesses who testified about, for example, the crimes committed in the first charge attack. 7 of Ntaganda's subordinates testified under oath, and all categorically admitted their participation in and knowledge of Ntaganda's forces having committed numerous crimes during the first attack. 768, 907, 963, 17, 10, 898, 888. And 4 senior FPLC officers who were not even present during the first attack all testified that they heard reports of crimes during that attack. 901, 55, 16, 190. Mr. Ntaganda stands alone in his denial. Mr. Ntaganda also professed his ignorance of the existence of the second charged attack. This, despite his own radio logbook communication orders during that attack, which you've seen many times during the course of the trial, and most recently in Ms. Looping's submissions. Those messages clearly establish his orders and reporting information about that attack. And though Mr. Ntaganda was informed of the crimes committed by, for example, Mulenda in Kobu, he failed to take any measures to punish Mulenda for his actions. In fact, none of the soldiers who participated in the UPC attacks in Kobu, Lipri, and Bamboo were ever punished. Instead, within 2 weeks of the massacre in Kobu, witness 55 heard Mr. Ntaganda praise Mulenda for being a real man in relation to that attack. Mr. Ntaganda also professes ignorance of the presence of children under the age of 15 within the ranks of the UPC FPLC, though he could plainly see them, even better than you can see them in the videos in evidence. And Mr. Ntaganda professes ignorance of the crimes of rape and sexual slavery. In his testimony, Mr. Ntaganda acknowledged that girls were separated at night in the camps for their protection. But yet, he also knew that this separation did not apply in all circumstances. For instance, when he decided to order his female escorts, girls, into his quarters, and as P10 explained to you, raped them himself. Given those coercive circumstances that he encouraged by his own actions, he was fully aware that other commanders were doing the same thing. Mr. Ntaganda's knowledge of the charged crimes is established through multiple sources of evidence and witness testimony, including Mr. Ntaganda's own admissions during his testimony. I won't highlight all of the evidence that is already included in the prosecution's written submissions, but I do wish to comment on Mr. Ntaganda's own testimony concerning what he knew about his own troops' activities. During his testimony, the accused admitted that he was, quote, up to speed with all the offenses being committed in our forces, unquote, and that, quote, I was really aware of everything that was going on at all times, unquote. He also conceded that there were no obstacles to his exercise of authority. Now, these are important admissions from the accused. They establish that he wasn't waiting for information to come to him. He was actively seeking out information. And he didn't encounter any obstacles in doing so. It is plain he was aware of what his troops were doing, committing terrible crimes, and he knew it. Why, you might ask, should Mr. Ntaganda be believed on these points about his knowledge of the events and not on other points? Well, these admissions are credible because, one, the evidence is consistent with other credible prosecution witness testimony on this point. And two, these are incriminatory admissions against his own self-interest. The defense stated that the prosecution misunderstood the meaning of Mr. Ntaganda's admissions about his knowledge of his own troops' behavior. We ask your honors to carefully scrutinize that claim, which attempts to walk back the accused's testimony. Scrutinize it, being mindful of Mr. Ntaganda's obvious, careful preparation of his testimony, his level of intelligence, and his full knowledge of the prosecution's allegations and evidence in this case. I would submit that the defense argument does not withstand scrutiny. Mr. Ntaganda, by his own testimony, knew of the crimes committed by the FPLC. In both the defense closing brief and its response brief, the defense make the claim that the should-have-known standard found in Article 28 of the Rome Statute should be interpreted as had reason to know, the same standard found in the ad hoc tribunal statutes. The drafters of the Rome Statute were clearly aware of the had reason to know standard, but decided to use the language should have known instead. The standard encompasses a limited form of criminal negligence, and it was plainly and deliberately introduced in the statute, which is the controlling source of law under Article 21. It cannot be interpreted away. Indeed, the careful distinction between Article 28A(1) and Article 28B(1) illustrates the drafter's explicit intention to impose an active criminal law duty upon military commanders to remain informed of their subordinates' activities, consistent with military practice and IHL. Having said that, this issue is not likely to arise because the evidence in this case establishes either standard. I'll now move to Mr. Ntaganda's failure to take necessary and reasonable measures. The evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that despite his material ability to act, Mr. Ntaganda failed to take all necessary and reasonable measures within his power to prevent the crimes, repress the crimes, or submit matters to competent authorities for investigation and prosecution. According to the defense, Mr. Ntaganda took multiple preventative and repressive measures to ensure discipline in the FPLC. The prosecution agrees that in instances that were not charged in this case, Mr. Ntaganda did punish his troops for disobeying orders, for desertion, for the loss of weapons, and for other offenses that Mr. Ntaganda saw as being important to his assertion of authority over his subordinates. The evidence plainly establishes that Mr. Ntaganda failed to take all necessary and reasonable measures within his power to prevent and punish the charged crimes. The general, ambiguous, and limited measures that Ntaganda claims he and the FPLC took were inadequate and unreasonable in light of his extensive material ability and the extent and categories of crimes committed. Additionally, and importantly, Mr. Ntaganda's position, as we understand it, is that the crimes we have charged and which are proven by the evidence in this case did not take place at all. He categorically denies the commission of the crimes. Logically, therefore, he does not claim that he took any measures to address the charged crimes. Additionally, his failure to take necessary and reasonable measures was established by several prosecution witnesses. For instance, prosecution witness 963, quote, "It was in the context of tribal war, so there were no sanctions, It was normal to kill an ordinary Lendu, unquote. Prosecution witnesses 907 and 768 never heard or saw any sanctions for killing Lendu. And prosecution witness 10 never witnessed anyone being disciplined for raping girls. To the extent that Mr. Ntaganda had control over his forces and knowledge of their crimes, he is culpable under Article 28A. The evidence establishes a high degree of both control and knowledge, and therefore a high degree of culpability. He could have ordered or initiated genuine and adequate investigations into the allegations of the commission of crimes by his forces, but he did not. He could have reported the crimes by his forces to appropriate authorities, but he did not. He could have disciplined, dismissed, demoted members of his forces who were involved in the crimes, but he did not. He could have provided adequate training in IHL, but he did not. In short, the evidence in the record is compelling and establishes beyond reasonable doubt that Mr. Ntaganda failed to take necessary and reasonable measures within his power to repress the crimes. Lastly, I will briefly address the issue of causation in Article 28.
Mr. Iverson, sorry to interrupt you, just one brief question. You said that Mr. Ntaganda could report it to competent authorities. What concrete authorities you had in mind in Ituri or during the time period of between 2002 and 2003?
Well, he certainly, within his hierarchy, he could have reported crimes to Mr. Lubanga. And there could have been a discussion about an investigation and prosecution. They could have, having the means to wage war automatically implies having the means to do several other things. For example, launch an investigation into what actions actually happened, establish facts, and hold those responsible accountable.
Thank you, and please proceed.
So, Your Honors, with regard to the issue of causation, the defense asserts without argument or authority in its response brief that, quote, the prosecution must prove a causation element between the crimes committed and the failure of the commander to exercise proper control. Now, it is the prosecution's position that no such requirement exists, and that references to causation rest on a misinterpretation of Article 28. And it has to do with the fact that command responsibility does not amount to accessorial participation in subordinates' crimes. Rather, command responsibility is a unique, non-participatory mode of liability which, by its focus on the commander's breach of duty, gives effect to the requirements of IHL while remaining linked to the scope of the subordinate's crimes. Applying the correct interpretive principles to Article 28 does not require causation. This follows from an analysis of the plain terms of Article 28, its context, the object and purpose of the statute, which includes to give effect to IHL, and is further informed by the drafting history, which shows no consensus among states for a causal contribution requirement in Article 28, which would have markedly departed from customary international law. This chamber is thus entitled and urged to find that Article 28 does not impose any causal contribution requirement at all. Indeed, the recent Bemba appeal judgment features no majority consensus on the correct interpretation of the statute on this point. And this underlines the misconceptions and compromises that exist in attempting to reconcile causation with command responsibility. In any event, though not legally required, the evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that the accused causally contributed to his subordinate's crimes by increasing the risk that crimes would be committed. Mr. Ntaganda increased the risk that his forces would commit crimes by failing to take measures to ensure compliance with IHL, by sending forces that had previously been accused of committing similar crimes, and by failing to punish forces who committed crimes during the initial stages of the armed conflict to create an atmosphere of general deterrence within his ranks. Your Honors, this is the last opportunity I'll have to address this chamber. I just want to thank you for your attentiveness, your engagement, and your patience, especially with me at times during the course of the trial. I'm confident that you will do justice in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Iverson. I have personally said I really see no need for apology in your case. Thank you very much. And Ms. Sampson, please.
Yes, Mr. President, I would just like to formally note that this concludes the presentation of the prosecution's evidence and that the case is before your honors for your objective, impartial assessment of the evidence and the reasonable conclusions and inferences that may be drawn from that evidence. We ask that you find Bosco Ntaganda guilty of the crimes as charged. Thank you.
Duly noted. All right, so we completed program for today. Tomorrow we are going to start our session from 9 o'clock, which should take 2 hours and should be devoted to submissions presented by legal representatives of victims. I have one question to Ms. Pelle and Mr. Suprun. Have you agreed on some order as regards your submissions or not? Or lady first? Or?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Il semble que je sois toujours la première, donc je commencerai demain matin.
All right, so agreed. So we will start tomorrow 9 o'clock. At the moment, the court is adjourned.
All rise.